Question for you. I would like to go back to the force doctrine theory, if we can. I just kind of want to understand more. I know you've talked a lot about the equal force objection in the past. You've said men have essentially a monopoly on force.
Correct.
If I'm correct. Okay, perfect.
And do you want me to walk you through the argument?
No, I'm going to elaborate. Thank you. And that rights exist through physical force, and that our legal system is based on physical force. So I guess I kind of just want to hear you elaborate on that now, if you're welcome.
So you want my argument for the force doctrine?
Yep.
Okay, so what force doctrine is saying is very simple. That feminism, if you at least agree with my definition, and it seems broadly feminists do, that it's a movement towards egalitarianism and equity and the removal of patriarchy. If you can't have an oppressed class without an oppressor class, at least not from the Marxist feminist view. In the case, if women are being oppressed, they're not being oppressed by wolves, they're being oppressed by men, right? So if that's the case, then my argument to them is that whatever you believe this oppression is, you will actually have to appeal to men in order to either relinquish whatever this oppression is, or concede to whatever it is that they want, because collectively women actually cannot overthrow any patriarchal systems. They rely on the force of men. And so if men, anytime they want to, decide to remove women's rights, there's actually not anything women can do about it, but the opposition is not true. The opposite is not true. Women cannot collectivize and take away men's rights.
Okay, so are you essentially saying that women do not deserve the right to fight for their own free will or have free will?
Yeah, that's an ought claim. I'm not making an ought claim. I'm trying to get us to the descriptor first. So instead of making a prescriptive statement, I'm starting with a descriptive statement. What is true, and then we can worry about what should be true after we can determine what is true.
Okay, but I'm trying to see, like, structurally, how does that work in the real world? Are you saying that women should not fight for their rights because they...
Listen, let's back up so I can distinguish two things.
Okay.
Is, ought, right?
Sure.
I'm not trying to bridge the is-ought gap. I'm trying to start with a descriptive claim. So if the descriptive claim is true, then we can move to the prescriptive side of it. But right now, you would either need to agree with me that descriptively I'm right or that descriptively I'm wrong.
I can't agree with you to say that descriptively you're right until you apply what you're saying in theory to the practice of modern day society. How does your equal force objection, how does this principle work in society? What are you saying in terms of how women and men coexist?
Yeah, I think that because that is the case, that men deserve to have various privileges that they're not given in society, which they should be given in society.
So what are the privileges that you think that men should have that women should not have?
Well, primarily, I think that if you're going to look at an equalization, what I would do prescriptively would be to roll voting back. And that's for both sexes. I think that rolling voting back for both sexes is a good idea, and have some sort of perhaps like one house voting system or one marriage voting system, or people who have done some sort of collective service to the state for a voting system. I think that those things would all be very good systems for everybody.
Why?
Now I would apply that, I would apply that broadly to men, and I would apply that to women. I think that right now men get the shaft because men are required to do a lot of jobs that women are not, which keeps society going, and women are not doing those things. And because of that, I don't understand why it is that women can nullify their votes and disenfranchise them, and most importantly, vote to send them to wars they don't have to go fight in.
So you would like to disenfranchise both the men and women's votes?
Mostly. Most of them, yes. I think would be a better idea.
What would this achieve?
Well, it would achieve the same thing our founders basically wanted to achieve, which is that they thought that you would have to have a stake in the country in order to vote.
But if you live in the country, and if you exist in the country, and if you're being legislated by the laws that the country is making, don't you have a stake in that?
No, not always.
You don't?
In fact, many times you don't. Many times, many people actually get more back from the state than they put into the state. So that's at the expense of other people.
Who is that?
So there's lots of people who get a mass amount back from the government that they never pay to the government. This can happen through things like Social Security disability, things like welfare, things like even earned income child credit that you may receive even though you don't actually pay anything into the system or very little into the system.
But it's a crime to lie on your taxes and commit. Isn't that tax fraud to claim a dependent?
No. There's just
that is tax fraud.
No. It's not tax fraud. I'm saying that there's people who get more out of the system than they put into the system.
Okay, but they're still at stake because they still live here, no?
Yeah,
Are their lives not at stake if we're
what is it?
legislating them?
But that wouldn't follow that because they live here, they deserve the right to vote, though.
Yes, no taxation without representation. That's the point of representative democracy, is that everyone is represented.
Then how come the founding fathers didn't give everybody the right to vote from the beginning?
I mean, the founding fathers also endorsed and owned slaves. Do you agree with chattel slavery?
Well, just let her finish. Go ahead.
I mean, the founding fathers also endorsed and owned slaves.
Just let her finish.
But
do you believe in chattel slavery?
Yeah. So you do realize that they could do bad thing, right? I can agree that's bad thing, but that has nothing relationally to do with how they set up the system of government.
I mean, I thought this was going to be a debate on feminism. Honestly, I think that's kind of wild because it sounds like you're disenfranchising men. So who do you think would be? Are you trying to go back?
I'm not.
You are. You're taking away.
I'm not disenfranchising men. Calm down. I'll explain.
But if you're taking away the votes of a man because he is not, I guess, landowning, is that what's the criteria for having a vote?
I think ultimately more men would be voting because they would have more stake.
So can I ask? Can every man go to prison?
Yeah.
Okay. If they commit a crime, they can go to prison.
Yeah.
Everyone can do that.
Yes.
Okay. And everyone is in this country has to abide by the laws of this country. Otherwise, they will go to prison. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So why wouldn't they be allowed to vote on the representatives that define those laws? That is a stake. If you can go to prison for committing a crime that is created by the government, then you do have a stake legislatively in the laws that the government creates.
That still wouldn't follow that you would need to vote.
Yes, you would need to vote.
Why?
You want to vote for the representatives that create laws that are just and fair to you.
Yeah, why? Like you could have
because you could go to prison. Okay, that's a huge stake.
I'll show you, right? Can kings put you in prison?
Yeah.
Can kings also pass just laws?
Sometimes, maybe.
Okay, so
maybe not.
If kings pass just laws, why do you need to vote?
Well, why did we fight an entire
answer
revolution?
the question before you ask another one. I just answered all of yours. If a king passes just laws, why would you need to vote?
Because a king can also pass unjust laws.
So can legislatures.
Sure, but if you have a stake in that and if you're able to represent for your legislator, you can vote a legislator out.
Yeah, but you can also rebel against kings. So like that's what I'm saying. Your position doesn't follow. It doesn't actually follow for you to say that because you can be imprisoned inside of a nation that somehow gives you the right to vote.
Well, because you have a stake. You're saying that
hang on. I'm falsifying your claim. I'm falsifying your claim. If you claim kings can make just laws, right?
Yes.
Then I don't understand. Why would people need to vote when kings are making just laws?
Well, then why would we leave the monarchy of England? If kings can make just laws, why would we leave?
Well, in that case, you had a nation apart that had a rebellion against the king.
Yes,
that's what was going on. But kings have been rebelled against historically under certain circumstances many times.
So you'd like to go back to feudalism? Like you don't believe in democracy? Well, yeah, that is
no, it would be
feudalism is under a monarchy.
It would be called limited democracy, which is exactly what we had here. Do you think we had feudalism because most people couldn't vote here?
We had limited democracy, and then there were like many uprisings against that limited democracy because everyone deserves the right.
No, there wasn't uprisings really against that. The only uprising that I'm aware of in American history against America was the Civil War.
The Civil War, the Civil Rights movement.
But that wasn't about
the first
voting.
Feminist movement.
That wasn't about
feminist
voting.
Movement, the Civil Rights movement.
No. The Civil War wasn't about voting.
Well, I mean, it was about the owning of chattel slaves.
So not about voting then?
Which is also about human and civil rights.
But not about voting, though.
But voting is a civil right.
I don't know. I'm not sure that I believe in this.
It's about freedom and it's about representation.
Yeah. So
the point is representation.
So let's back up.
That's what voting is. Voting is representation and democracy.
I understand, but you haven't actually made the positive case for why people need to be able to vote.
People need to be able to vote because they have a stake in the legislation in this country. If you can be imprisoned at this country, if you can be robbed of your bodily autonomy by the legislators of this country, then you should be able to have a stake in what the laws that those legislators are making.
Well, let's see if this makes sense. Do you agree with me that individual voters don't actually have very much power at all?
Individual voters, no, but that's the point of a collective voting body.
I'm with you. So individuals already don't really have very much power just because they can vote, right?
Sure.
So isn't it the case, actually, that what you're advocating for is political tribalism? Because you don't have individual power as a voter, you actually have to tribalize with other voters in order to have any sort of collective power, right?
Well, you're taking away power from all the voters, so it wouldn't even be
answer my question, please? Tribalism, the idea that you, as the individual, do not have power, right?
Yes.
You do have to collectivize with other people, right?
Okay, but how is taking away
a vote? Yes or no?
No.
Yeah. Okay. No.
But here's my question: how is taking away more people's votes disincentivizing political tribalism.
Yeah,
because now I have to band with someone. Because now I have to band with someone who has a vote. I don't even get a stake. So you're saying because people don't have enough power to vote, I'm going to take what little power they do have.
You're not answering my question, though.
It just doesn't make sense structurally.
Yeah, I know, but you got to answer my question.
It just doesn't sound like you believe in
It sounds
democracy.
like you need to answer my question, though.
It sounds like your question is meant to trap me because your argument
Can you
is
just
riddled with
answer the
logical
question,
fallacies.
please? What's fallacious about my argument?
You're saying that people do not have a stake in this country, therefore they do not have a right to vote.
It's not what I said.
Yes,
what you're doing is a straw man fallacy.
Can we go back to what
you can
said?
go. You can go back. What I said to you
that?
specifically is what you're saying doesn't logically follow. And when I'm talking about political tribalism, do you agree with me that you do, if you need to have collectives to have actual political power, are you not promoting political tribalism?
If you need to have but that's how voting works. It's about a majority.
So then you are promoting collective political tribalism, right?
So voting and then the will of the majority is essentially political tribalism, is what you're saying?
Well, it's not really the will of the majority. Here's what happens. No, not really.
Do you understand how voting works?
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, well then tell me how it's the will of the majority when a California legislator gets elected.
Well, everyone who would like to vote can vote, and then whoever gets the most
What about the
votes
people in Georgia?
Wins. Well, why would a person in Georgia get to vote on a legislator?
So it's not really the
California
collective, it's the tribe, right?
But then Georgians get to vote for their state legislator.
Right, so it's a tribe then?
And then all of those legislators come together
so it's a
to
tribe.
create laws.
So it's a tribe?
It's not a tribe, but those are called states.
Yeah,
That's
states are voting for their own interests, right?
But states will vote for the governors.
Yeah.
Why would I get to vote for the governor? Hold on, pause.
Hold on.
Listen to me. Why would I get to vote for the governor of, let's say, Tennessee if I don't live in Tennessee?
Makes sense.
Okay.
So it's almost like these individual states, right? They vote along tribal lines for that state's particular interests, right?
Yes, and then each state has a representative in the collective government.
Sure. In the federal government, right? You're talking about in our Senate and in our Congress, right?
Yes.
Great. So let's start with this. If it is the case that you have California and Nevada, these are two states which are next to each other, you agree, right?
Yes.
Can these states vote against each other's interests when it comes to resources?
In the federal government, yes.
No, even at the state level they can, right?
Why would they be able to at the state level? I can't vote for the Nevada governor. I can't vote for
because perhaps there's something perhaps Nevada has some type of assessed tax or something like this that they're able to collect, which disproportionately affects Californians in some way. They can do that, right?
What law is that?
Whatever it would be, they can do it.
Does it exist or does it not exist?
Can they do that? Can they do that is my question.
Can Nevada legislate against California?
No, they're not legislating against. Listen to my question. Actually, I want you to repeat my question so I know you actually heard it.
I'm sorry, I'm not a dog.
Can you repeat it? Well, it's called steel manning a position.
Just say the question.
Okay. Can states vote against other states' interests simply by having a neighboring state, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just say, for instance, that you were to have trucks which went between Nevada and California, right?
Yes.
And California took advantage of this by raising taxes on gasoline, but only on the border areas where these goods came in. This disproportionately hurts Nevada truckers for some reason, right? They can do that, right?
Yes, they can do that.
Okay, great. So in California, if that was beneficial to Californians, they would basically be voting for their tribe against Nevada, right?
But is that happening?
It does
happen.
happen.
Just trying to use a hypothetical?
No, there's tons and tons of instances where different states do various things, even asking for federal money in overages compared to other states for different problems. Same thing with disaster support. They definitely are all trying to support their tribe, right?
Okay, so because states can potentially, hypothetically, vote against another state's interest, men and women should not have the right to vote.
No, that's not the conclusion.
But that was your argument.
No,
the privilege is
do you know what a descriptor
voting,
is?
Both sexes,
What's a
one marriage voting system.
Why don't you understand the difference between a descriptor and prescriptor? What did I prescribe?
What you prescribed is one voting system, a voting system in which both men and women are disenfranchised.
Yeah, what I'm doing right now is I'm giving you descriptors so we can determine if it's tribalism or not, because you said it's not tribalism to have collectivism in voting blocks, which is insane.
But what you haven't been able to answer is why disenfranchising more voters is somehow solving political tribalism.
Let her get to the end of the sentence, please.
Well, let me explain it.
Sure.
The best way that I possibly can.
I
Your
hope you try.
worldview promotes political tribalism. So what happens is this. NGOs can go to our government and they can bribe them for voting blocks. And that's exactly what they do. Non-government organizations do this, and lobbyists do this. And what they do is they raid the treasury from people like you and me so that they can bribe certain portions of the electorate in order to incentivize them to collectivize.
Okay.
That's why black people often vote as a monolith, for instance. They vote monolithically, up to 80, 90% together, especially in national elections, because they're made certain promises out of the treasury from the electorate, usually at the expense of other forms of voters. This is 100% tribalism.
So how are NGOs bribing politicians, influencing who black people as individuals choose to vote for?
How do NGOs do that?
I just don't understand how you're saying. I mean, I agree that NGOs should not be bribing and lobbyists shouldn't be bribing, but instead of
that's what they do, though, right?
Okay, but we're trying to get back to your claim that
I'm in
less
the middle of
people
my
should
claim.
vote. Okay, well, I'm responding because this is a conversation.
Yeah.
Sure. So we're trying to get back to your claim that less people from both sexes should be able to vote.
Yeah, no, that's not where we just were.
But that's your initial claim,
Yeah,
yes?
but now you're just pivoting. Where we just were was...
Well, you're not letting me finish my sentence.
No,
if you'd let
because
me finish my sentence,
you're
we could go back.
pivoting. We're talking right now about whether tribalism is descriptively true in your voting system.
I understand that, but we're trying to get back to your initial claim because you have a very important claim to defend. You're trying to take votes away from the American people poorly, but let's get into
okay.
it. So NGOs bribe, lobbyists bribe, and that is impacting who and what politicians are promoting. I would agree with that statement. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, not just what they're promoting, but also they are setting the precedent for laws themselves.
Okay, yes.
So they actually, I would even argue back that NGOs and private think groups write the laws in which politicians most often execute, and so do bankers as well.
I agree with that. So why would taking away votes from the average American and singular citizen prevent NGOs and lobbyists from having an ability to impact and predict and create laws?
Yeah, so if you move to stakeholder democracy, this idea that you had to have some sort of public service or something like this, it actually collectivizes down the voting pool, which adds responsibility to the voters who can then be held accountable, which right now voters can't be. That's why it's so important. So
Voters can be held accountable.
So you're saying how?
Well, legislators will create laws that hold those voters accountable.
How?
We're the ones who have to follow them. Do you not have to follow the laws?
Well, that's not you being held accountable.
It is being held accountable.
No. So right now, under tribalism, you can get laws passed which affect me but benefit you. I can't go hold you somehow accountable for that.
But that's how a majority voting works. That's how democracy
I know,
works.
which is why I want limited democracy where we can actually hold people accountable.
Because you just want to be in charge.
How would I be in charge if it's stakeholder democracy?
Well, you said one marriage voting system.
That could be one way of doing it, yes.
Okay, what are the other ways of doing that?
Another good way would be public service.
So whoever does a public service.
Perhaps up to 3 to 5 years unpaid, or military service would be good.
So during this public service in which people are working 3 to 5 years unpaid, how are they paying for food and groceries and housing?
Yeah, so the state would take care of that just like they do in the military.
The state would take care of that like they do in the military. And how do you plan on getting that passed?
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, because
let's say I could never get it passed. We're arguing the ideology of this system. What does that have to do with anything?
What's the point in creating an ideology that will never work?
How are you going to get Marxism passed?
You're not.
So aren't you a Marxist? But you're a Marxist, right?
How did you know that?
Well, I don't know. That's what your videos seem to imply, that you believe in Marxist feminism.
Did I ever say that I was in Marxist?
Oh, I don't know. Are you a socialist?
On a certain level.
Okay,
somewhat.
how are you going to get socialist? That's silly. That us making the comparison contrast between socialism, capitalism has no bearing on whether or not I could somehow get this passed or have some plan to get it passed.
Okay.
I'm arguing about the ideology here.
Do you want to understand my belief or do you just want to guess?
Well, hang on. What does that have to? Do you know what I just said, though?
Well, I mean, you just called me a Marxist.
Do you
agree?
agree?
Just called me a socialist,
well, if you're not a Marxist, I retract that. You said you're somewhat a socialist. That's fair, but do you realize that we're doing a comparison contrast of worldviews and ideology? If we're doing contrast worldview and ideology, it's a non sequitur to ask me, well, how are you going to get it passed? What does that have to do with anything?
Well, why would you create a worldview that fundamentally cannot work in practice? That sounds
it's
like
not
a
worldview that fundamentally cannot work in practice.
But you couldn't say how it works in practice.
Even if I couldn't prescriptively tell you, the next political chain of things we do to get there has nothing to do with whether or not the worldview in practice would work.
Well, do you have any practical guesses for how we could apply this to a modern day? society?
Well, I just told you how we would apply it. You would have stakeholder democracy.
Okay, so that's just so one day we're just going to flip a switch and have that. Like, I don't understand.
No, what do you mean? Okay, you could have an amendment for it. You could repeal the 19th Amendment. You could...
So you want to repeal the right to vote?
Or just replace it. It wouldn't be... What I'm talking about is universal suffrage. You keep on making a conflation in terms. You think that because I say universal suffrage, that means no suffrage. I'm talking about limited suffrage.
So who gets to decide who gets the right to vote?
Didn't I literally just tell you who gets to decide who gets to vote?
Okay, so everyone who participates in this public service gets the right to vote.
That could be one way to do it, yes.
Okay, and that anyone could do that who wanted to?
Yeah, people could do it if they're willing to give up X amount of years of their lives for unpaid service so that they could then vote.
But it's not unpaid service because the government would be paying for their food and their housing.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be getting anything additional to that.
Okay, well, why not just have civil servants who are already...
Because civil servants have specific jobs to do, like, working at the DMV and stuff like that, and working in the Social Security office.
So you're basically saying anyone who does community service should get the right to vote?
No, some sort of civil occupational service under the state. That could be like civil firefighting work, maybe. It could be civil paramedic work. It could be there's all sorts of different things you can look at for stakeholder democracy. When we've seen it applied around the world, it's been somewhat successful.
And do the laws apply to everyone in the society or just the people who choose to participate?
Apply to everyone, yeah.
Okay. So how can you create and apply a law to people who are not represented? I just don't understand. Morally, how do you justify
There's nothing immoral about it.
There's nothing immoral about it? I mean, but that's
like,
kind of
I would say it's more immoral. Why is it moral for an 18-year-old to nullify the vote of a 41-year-old if the 18-year-old doesn't even know what they're voting for? How's that moral?
Well, because the 18-year-old is still subject to the laws of the state.
Yeah, but they don't even know what they're voting for.
Can an 18-year-old go to jail for 20 years?
A 16-year-old can. Should they be able to vote?
16-year-olds can't go to jail.
Yes, they can. 16-year-olds can go to jail for life. Should they be able to vote?
I mean, no, but why?
Well, why not? Why not? The laws apply to them, though.
Why would a 16-year-old be going?
Hang on,
I
don't understand. Because he murdered someone.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, if you murder someone, that's a whole.
So I don't understand. Why can't he vote? The laws apply to him. Why can't he vote?
Yeah, but we all understand that.
No, we all understand it's not an argument. Why does a 16-year-old get to vote, even though all the laws apply to the 16-year-old? Why does he get to vote?
No, the laws apply. They start in juvenile detention, and then at 18, they get the right to go.
So laws apply to 16-year-olds?
But you're retried at 18.
So laws apply to 16-year-olds?
Some laws, of course,
Okay,
yes.
great. Why can't they vote then?
So babies should get the right to vote?
That's my question to you. That makes no sense. Exactly. So why do we limit it to 18?
Well, that's the age that we've defined as being a legal adult. That's the age that we as a country have universally agreed with our right to vote is.
Yeah, but what makes that a good idea? Just because you arbitrarily.
That's the age.
Yeah, but just because you arbitrarily say, for instance, that because you're 18 and you're an adult, like you can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy beer, you can't rent a car, but you're an adult. And now you can vote in the participation of democracy. At least raise it.
So you'd like to raise it?
At least raise it.
So you would like to universally raise the age to vote? I think that would be a better idea than like not allowing anyone.
No. What I said is at least do that. But the thing is, like, you're actually inconsistent here. Your whole argument is to say if laws affect people, they should have a right to vote. But we have an entire cast of people from the age 17 down who laws apply to and can't vote. And you just are like, you shrug that off like you didn't contradict yourself.
I'm pretty sure it has something to do with brain development. But we've all, like, you have to have an
not fully developed till what, 25 according to the studies?
But how do you have a society in which you don't have an age that someone becomes a legal adult?
I agree, but why couldn't you have a society in which you had stakeholder democracy? It's the same logic.
So if you're saying that we should not disenfranchise children, why would you then disenfranchise people who are legal adults?
When did I ever make the claim that I wanted children to be able to vote?
You just said that if everyone should have the right to vote.
No, I told you that your view is inconsistent. If it is the case propositionally, you say, Andrew, if laws apply to people, they should be able to vote. Except, I don't know, everybody's 17 and under. That's inconsistent.
Because the laws do apply to children
It's inconsistent and a contradiction.
But laws do apply to children.
What about the laws that don't? What about the laws that don't? What about the laws where you're 17 years old and you could be tried as an adult?
Well, those are to protect like public freedom. I mean, but everyone loses civil liberties when they are a danger to the public.
Yeah, but that's
everyone.
Do you understand that you're making a contradiction when you say if laws should apply to all All people should have a right to vote because they have laws which can be applied. They can be sent to prison, was your example. That would have to include everyone under the age of 18.
But people under the age of 18 don't go to adult prisons.
Yes, they do all the time.
Don't.
Yes, they do. That is, you want me to give you sources of 16, 17-year-olds tried as adults and sent to adult prisons?
Okay, but that's like an exception for exclusively horrific crimes. I mean, those are violent offenders.
Does the law apply to them or not?
To violent offenders, if you are a threat to public safety, yes.
Okay.
Everyone who
then
is a
if
threat
the
to public
law
safety,
applies to them and they can be sent to jail, then by your logic, they should be able to vote, which means you're in contradiction.
To those offenders, they are sent to juvenile detention centers until they turn 18, and then they are sent to an adult prison. They're
sent often to adult centers, even at 17, to adult prisons.
You can be sentenced as an adult, but you can't be sent to an adult prison at the age of 16.
This would depend widely on the state that you're in. It's not rigorously enforced across the board like you think. There's not I don't think there's federal laws which say this. But even if it were the case, I'll just grant it.
Well, then that's wrong.
I'll even grant the entire thing. It still wouldn't matter. Laws apply to them. They can still be sent to prison. They fit both of your criteria. Therefore, if you say they shouldn't be able to vote, your worldview's in contradiction.
Well, then I think that's wrong. I don't believe that children should be tried as adults until they have become adults.
So no laws apply to children?
No.
Well, then why shouldn't they be able to vote?
A threat to public safety always applies to everyone. Threats to public safety always apply to everyone.
Yeah, but why shouldn't they be able to vote if laws apply to them? That's your example.
Laws apply to children, but they are not, in practice, punished in the same way that they apply to adults. It's applied differently.
Can they be punished?
Of course they can
Then
be
why
punished.
can't they vote?
But you have to have some way to maintain societal control. Children aren't just allowed to do whatever the fuck they want because they're kids.
You need to be able to have some sort of societal control. So
Yes.
this would mean necessarily disenfranchising some people, wouldn't it?
It would mean necessarily disenfranchising children. Yes, they're not adults.
No, it would also mean disenfranchising prisoners. Do you want prisoners to vote on their right to own guns in a prison?
Not their right to own guns in a prison.
Well, then you're
But I
disenfranchising
do think
them.
that people who were in prison and then leave prison should then have
Felons?
the right to vote.
But they're disenfranchised currently under the law, right?
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. If you're a felon, you can't vote.
Yes. Oh, well, once they leave, yes, I do think that that's disenfranchisement, and I think Florida just rolled that back.
Yeah,
For
but
Florida.
what's wrong with disenfranchising like murderers for life?
What's wrong with disenfranchisement? Well, they would be in jail for life. If
No.
they committed a
They're
murder.
out of jail. They're just felons, so they can't vote.
Well, I think that felons should be able to vote once they
Should
have
felons
left.
be able to own guns?
No, because it's.
Oh, well, I don't understand you. So you're again,
But do
you
you
are so
understand-
inconsistent with your
Pause a minute.
disenfranchising.
Pookie, do you understand?
What?
Disenfranchisement should exist so long as someone is a threat to public safety. The reason why prisoners are not allowed to vote who are currently in prison is because they are a threat to public safety.
16-year-olds aren't a threat to public safety.
No, but they're children. You can't allow anyone to
So
vote
you
who's a
can
child.
arbitrarily disenfranchise people based on the fact that you think they're not capable of making good voting decisions, right?
No, a child is legally different than an adult.
Because they can't make
You can't have sex with a child. That would be statutory rape.
Because they can't make good decisions?
No, because they're legally classified as a child. Do you not understand what
Because
a
they
child is?
can't make good decisions.
Because they're 2 and 3 and 4. They're not legally an
So
adult.
they can't make good decisions.
No, they can make good decisions, but generally speaking, you can't have children vote. There is a
I
legal age
agree
to
with
vote.
you. You can't.
Okay.
But why is it then that if I were to say that I only want 25-year-olds to vote, I would be disenfranchising?
But you didn't say you only want 25-year-olds to vote. You
do you
said
understand?
that you only want one marriage voting system per household.
Yeah,
You
well, that's
said
one way, yeah.
You want less of
But-
both adult men and adult women.
But do you understand how my
to
view is
be able to vote.
consistent, but yours isn't? Because if you were to agree with me that you wanted, like, okay, Andrew, I would compromise the 25-year-olds voting, you've now disenfranchised everyone from the ages of 18 through 24.
If you were considered
all
a legal
overnight.
adult, you should be able to vote. That's my state. If you are considered a legal adult, if you are tried as an adult, if you are allowed to buy a house,
Yeah.
have a child.
But that leads to the problem is that leads to political tribalism. So, like, for instance, why is it a healthy society to have men and women who are married voting against each other? That's a terrible idea.
Because they're both like. But if a man commits a murder, does his wife go to jail for that crime?
No.
No, because they're not the same fucking person.
What does that have to do with anything?
If they're different people and they're both tried differently and they both have separate lives and
Yeah.
separate bank accounts
Yeah.
and separate bodily and physical autonomy,
Yeah.
then they should each get a stake in this government. No.
Well, that literally has nothing to do with what I just asked.
They're not the same
So real
person,
quick,
so why should they be represented
You remember
under the
how
same
I said
thing?
yes and no to your question? Can you do that for me? Remember how I was like, yes. and just answered it? Can you actually do that for me too?
I don't remember that at all.
You literally just asked me that question. You said, if a husband's carted off to prison, does her wife go to prison? I said no.
Okay.
Can you do that for me too, and then give your explanation? Because otherwise, I don't know your actual position.
Thing and then give the explanation.
So now I'd like to know:
you should listen.
Do you think it's a good idea for wives and husbands to be able to vote against each other's interests?
They should both have a vote. Yes.
Well, but they can vote against each other's interests, right?
That is circumstantial. They may not. They might.
Yeah, they may not. They might. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But why is it good that option's even there? Seems like a terrible idea.
Because in a representative democracy, everyone should be represented with a vote.
Yeah, I get that's a descriptive truth, but you're not telling me why that should be the case. If I were to give you the counterclaim here, I would say if you had like one household voting or something like this, it would be much more uniform and wouldn't divide families against each other. And that's exactly what the vote has done.
But they're both subject to the same legislative, like they can both be legislated independent of each other, right?
No, well, not really. One cannot, at that point, make a decision that doesn't affect the other one, usually.
Yes, I can.
Not really. What?
I mean, Roe v. Wade. That only affects a woman's body, right? No?
You think that if a man is married to a woman and she goes and aborts his baby, that doesn't affect him?
Of course it does, but it affects him differently than his body.
But that's my whole point is that everything they do in this household is going to affect each other.
Sure.
So you wouldn't want to promote systems which divide husbands against wives.
But they're individuals. No.
What does that do with anything?
Are they the same person or not?
This is not what's in dispute.
Are they the same person or not?
Okay. No.
Then why should they not each have an individual liberty? What if they get a divorce?
Because you don't want to set up systems that divide them against each other. That's a bad idea.
Well, then don't marry someone who doesn't want to vote with you. But that's...
No, do you understand that like people's preferences change over time? And there could be various reasons in which if you have a tribal type of mentality, like take abortion, for instance. Abortion's a great one. Do you think that it's possible that women, for instance, could hold it against their husband and say things like, do this or I'll abort your child? They could actually do that, right?
Yeah, hypothetically, sure.
Yeah, and have done that.
And that would be immoral.
And have done that.
That would be immoral.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say they couldn't go get the abortion, would you?
But would you say a man can't?
But hang on. Answer the question first.
What?
You wouldn't say that they shouldn't be allowed to do that, though, would you?
Well, if it would be disenfranchising millions of other women who aren't in that situation and need an abortion, then
yes or no, please. You wouldn't say that you would not actually say that they should not be allowed to get the abortion, right?
No, I think everyone should have access to free will.
Okay, so even if it were the case that a woman, right, was holding the man basically emotionally hostage with her pregnancy and said, do what I say or I'll get an abortion, right, you would not make any claim that she could or could not get that abortion, would you?
I would make a claim that what she's doing is immoral, but I wouldn't make a claim that because
and should
one
anything
person is
happen
immoral,
to a woman who does that?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, that's blackmailing.
It's not blackmail?
I think on a level it's emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
I think you should be able to sue
so
someone
what should happen? Should they go to jail?
I mean, maybe pay damages or a fine.
A fine?
Yeah.
How much should the fine be?
I don't know.
$200?
How much is an abortion?
They'd be the same as an abortion?
Can I ask you a question?
So just to get this right, well, I want to finish this real quick.
No,
and then we can move back. Well, no, you can't until I finish the inquiry.
Okay, well, I'm not going to answer your question.
But you can inquire back. Sure. I just want to finish this inquiry, the line of inquiry, that's all. So just to make sure I got this right, you have now said that the tribal voting does indeed pit husband against wife, has a potential to do so. Right? And I've even conceded to specific examples of where it would be in a woman's interest to vote against her husband, to have a right to do something which could be used against him later, and then said, well, the punishment should be like, oh, maybe she pays a fine if something like that happens. And how are you going to convince people that that's a better system than one household voting? That's a terrible system.
Because then the leader of that household or the head of that household has control over the right and the will of every single person in that household. You're fundamentally denying people free will. They're not allowed to. Yes, they are. Because if they're
fundamental
both
denying of free will, huh?
Because if they're both legislated by the same government, and one of them has no say in who is elected into that government, but still, because you're still
they still have
impacted
free
by
will.
law, but you're still impacted by laws.
So what? You're being impacted by laws when you're 17. They can't vote. You have a consistency issue.
Not at the same extent as an 18-year-old. Not at the same extent.
They can have it to the same extent as an 18-year-old.
in very rare exceptions. But you're
but they
fighting on
can
an,
then. So you're disenfranchising people.
But look at you. You're around the fringe. You're fighting on an exception. We're talking about the general population.
Even
right
in
now.
the general population.
I'm not talking about murderers.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about
so
serial
let's start
killers.
with this.
I'm not talking about school shooters.
I don't think it's, generally speaking, a good idea to let 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds to vote, to disenfranchise the votes of people who are politically informed, because they're being used as a leverage voting block for elitists. And that's what's actually happening. What's actually happening was what you just said. NGOs and lobbyists are lobbying Congress to get various things passed, and what they do is they try to leverage the votes from a tribalist purview in order to get the things that they want, right? And 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds are highly impressionable, right? So are 22, 23, 24, 25-year-olds highly impressionable. And one way that you could eliminate this idea that they could be gone after by the parasitic NGOs who run things is by simply limiting the ability to vote to people who have such a political interest that they actually do social service for up to 5 years, so that then we can trust them with the right to vote.
Okay. I have two statements. Can you let me get through them?
Sure.
Okay. So here's number one. I agree that lobbying generally is bad. I'm not here for NGOs. I don't think anyone really is. I mean, and the whole point of why we don't like them is because we want to be represented by our legislators fairly and accurately, and we don't want it to be in the control of a private interest group.
So lobbying's bad.
Yes, generally, okay. I think that lobbyists and NGOs are not
bad.
Good. But what I don't understand is, if that's the issue, why not ban NGOs? Why not have a platform that's standing against NGOs and lobbyists? I think that'd be something great.
Yeah, so
if you did that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so this is a great question, but here's the problem, right? Yeah. This is the leverage of tribalism and why you can't really do that. So on social issues, right, there are NGOs out there, for instance, who have a vested interest in abortions being legal, right? This goes out into the social ethos, and now we're battling over the social issue. We have become tribal. Right? We've become tribal. Then you have NGOs who battle against it, let's say, this social issue. They also are making a ton of money off of the counter battle, let's say, also utilizing political tribalism. The whole idea here is divisive tribalism is what enables NGOs to begin with. They make a ton of money off of it, especially off of race hustling and DEI.
So then again, why not just ban NGOs and lobbyists?
Yeah,
and
you can't
allow everyone to still have a vote in a representative
I'm giving
democracy.
you the descriptor.
I think it's hilarious that you keep calling democracy tribalism.
It leads to tribalism, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
full democracy leads to tribalism.
So
There's no way around it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so does sports. Sure.
So should we ban sports?
No, why would you ban sports? That's a total non sequitur. It makes no sense.
Why would you ban a huge percentage of the population from voting?
Because I would want to avoid political tribalism so that elitists can't exploit low information voters, which they do right now, in order to enslave the planet.
So you're basically saying that people are too stupid to have the right to vote?
Yes.
That's dumb, dude.
Don't you agree with that?
Yeah, of course I think people are stupid.
Well, then what are you arguing with me about?
Because if I want a right to vote, then I should give them the right to vote.
Why? But listen, think about what you just said. Yeah, dude, I agree that people are too stupid to vote, but give them the right to vote anyway.
I don't think people are too stupid to vote.
Why? So they're too stupid to function, but they're smart enough.
Stupid to function.
Come on. You think that people who go and generally cast a ballot are high information voters, or they barely even know what the hell they're talking about?
I mean, do you have a statistic on how many of them are?
Yeah, you could do street polls. A lot of people have no idea what's even going on with the issues. A lot of people are just bussed to poll booths. They get bribed to do it. This happens on both sides of the aisle. Like, how many times have you seen canvassing campaigns who go out there and they're canvassing, they knock on doors, that people don't even know what the hell they're talking about?
So what, you think we should do an IQ test for everyone to have the right to vote?
That's been suggested, right? But I have a better plan than an IQ test. I would not disenfranchise a person from being able to vote because they have like an average IQ.
Yeah.
What I would do is disenfranchise a person to vote if they were low information. One way I could find out if they were really politically motivated is if they sacrificed years of their lives to the state in order to get that right to vote.
So you want to punish people for being stupid?
No, I just don't want them to nullify well-informed votes from people who are smart and on the issues and understand the issues.
But taking away someone's vote would be punishing them in a sense.
It's not punishing them.
Yeah,
it's actually stopping them from punishing themselves and the rest of society because they're easily exploited by social elites.
That's fair. I mean, but why not then just target education? Like, why not then
We
try to
spend
fund
5% of the entire GDP of the United States on education. It's the highest anywhere in the world, and we have some of the dumbest people on planet Earth. Our literacy rate is barely... You know what the literacy rate is.
Yeah, it's garbage.
It's trash. And we spend 5%, the biggest GDP on planet Earth. We spend 5% total of our GDP on education. And you think that education's going to solve the problem of the low information voter?
Well, if the issue is that people are stupid, help them be smarter.
There's a lot of that is a mixture of genes and environment and nourishment and all sorts of different things. It's like you can't, this whole progressive
well, if
idea.
It's environment and nourishment, then why not attack
this
those
whole
things?
stupid progressive idea of like, you can just educate people into whatever it is. It's like, no, you really can't. Like, there's a lot of people who are just going to be fucking janitors, okay? There's a lot of, okay?
All right.
There's a lot of people who are just going to be fucking janitors and who are just going to be fucking toilet bowl cleaners and who are just going to be fucking bartenders and are really not meant to build fucking rocket ships, okay?
I know, but they're still subject to laws. So they
Yeah,
still get
I know,
a
but
say.
just being...
And it's frustrating, but it's just a fact.
Yeah,
if I want free will and they want, and you want free will and we deserve the right to vote, then they do too.
No, you're not eliminating free will by this.
You are,
You're
though.
protecting the rest of society from low information voters destroying their lives.
Yeah,
like, do you
but you
really
still
think?
can't
Let me ask you
take
this.
someone else's free will
let me ask you
because
this.
they're stupid.
If you were to, yeah, but you're not really doing that. What
You
you're
are.
doing.
A vote is an exercise in free will.
Let me ask you this: if you had to choose,
Yes.
right, for your family,
Sure.
and you knew that you could move them to a place where there was a bunch of people who were highly informed on political processes in the local community, or you can move them to a place where people didn't give a shit, right? Which place would you prefer them to be?
I would prefer them to be in the higher.
Of course,
Obviously.
right? At
Yeah.
the place where the people are the most informed.
Speaking of which, my mother's calling me. Here, I'm going to screen her. Sorry, Mom. Love you.
Now, if you were able to, if these people were able to cast votes and nullify all of the votes of you high information voters, right? Wouldn't it actually be better for them and for you to disenfranchise their voting so that you guys could actually vote on political and policy issues that made sense?
Well, I don't think that stupid people are nullifying all of the votes of smart people.
Really? Think about what you just said.
them.
Can you
Not
think
all of
about what
them.
you just... Do you
Not
think there's
all
more
of them.
stupid people or smart people?
In this country, yeah, it's probably more.
Okay, so you really don't think stupid people are nullifying the votes of smart people?
On a certain level, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they still deserve free will. I can't.
They
rob
still
someone
have free will.
They don't, because they're still subject to the laws of this
Voting
country.
is a privilege. If you go to Australia and you commit a crime, can you go to jail in Australia?
Yeah.
But you can't vote in Australia, right?
Sure.
So do you see how that makes no sense? Like
It
what
does
you're
make
saying
sense,
makes
though.
no
I mean,
sense.
if you travel to another country and endanger people, like that's a threat.
You're not
to
even
public
endangering
safety.
people. If you're just like drunk in public, you can be arrested.
That is a threat to public safety.
No.
Public intoxication is
Look,
a threat to public
that
safety.
doesn't mean you're going to actually do anything wrong, right?
But you could.
Yeah.
Drunken people are habitually more
you
violent,
could break
statistically more
Or
violent.
you could break some public ordinance, right? You could break some public ordinance you didn't know about, like you're on a beach, right?
Yeah.
And you're in your shorts, and it was supposed to be t-shirts and shorts, something like this.
Yeah, but breaking public ordinances doesn't lead to jail time.
It does if you don't pay the fine.
Well, then you should pay the fucking fine.
Well, see what I mean, though? So you are subject to those laws,
Yes.
and you are subject to imprisonment based on those laws.
You
And if
should be-
that's the case, you can't vote in those countries.
Okay, but you're not a citizen of that country. You're still a citizen of this country. If you were a citizen
That's my
of this
whole
country
point,
and you
though.
live here and you are subject to the
Yeah.
laws of this country for your entire life, from birth to death,
Yeah.
you should have
Why do you
stake.
want dumb people to disenfranchise your well-informed vote? That makes no sense. Not only that, you say that you're actually emboldening them with their free will, right? It's like, that's so silly, because ultimately, these people who are politically low information, they're so low information, you're allowing them to get taken advantage of.
Of course, I don't want dumb people to disenfranchise my vote, but I don't think that the solution to that is a one marriage voting system or you have to do public service for 5 years. To have
Give me an alternative.
But can't dumb people do that too? Like, couldn't a dumb person just do some fucking community service for 5 years and then get paid? I mean, like, there are dumb people in the army.
Listen, I agree with you that there can be some stupid people who get through the system, but they're not going to be probably low information. You're not going to go through 5 years of civil service like that for the purpose of being able to vote and be low information, or you wouldn't do it. You have an interest. That's what the whole point is.
Well, I mean, if your housing and your food is paid for, I think there are a lot of people who would be interested in that. The army. I mean, that's like exactly a
the
version
army.
of civil
You have
service.
to take the army. You have to take an ASVAB test, and you have to score X amount of a score in order to even be placed in those things.
Big dog. My boyfriend's a vet. He talks about some dumb motherfuckers in the army.
Sure, there's dumb people in the army.
But so they would.
But to qualify for certain jobs, you can't be. And for civil service or something like this, you can do intelligence tests or things like that.
You're basically saying there should be an IQ test, and only those who would like to be civil servants who pass that IQ test.
Well, I think you should probably implement an IQ test for the military too, which they do.
Yeah, but people say.
I mean, but they do. But they do, unless it's in wartime and they're like, okay, well, you just need a body in here, and then they'll grab anybody off the street. But yeah.
Can we ask a vet right now? I want to confirm that.
Of course.
Aiden, do you do IQ tests for the military?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, man. I know guys in the army who are like mentally.
Wait, you want boyfriend reveal?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Wait. Oh, go. It's okay.
Yeah.
Just go around that way.
Army. No, I'm playing.
Yeah, there are people who are there who are dumb. That's true, but they.
Here, baby, come here for us.
If you can, just kind of like.
I've heard of that. It's called a Cat
Crouch
5
right
waiver, right? They give them a Cat 5 waiver.
I'm talking about Category 5 waivers. I'm talking about.
Can you just
Baby, come here.
Shalom. Hi.
Not shalom.
In terms of like people in the army and IQ tests, like I've taken the ASVAB, it is not a very difficult test, and a lot of people get their ASVABs taken for them. I knew guys in the army who were like medically diagnosable with mental deficiencies and were still in the army doing jobs that in theory required a certain level of mental faculty.
Sure. Yeah, the system can get gamed, but those are exceptions, not the rule.
I wouldn't really go that far, to be honest with you. And then also in terms of your...
You don't think the majority of people are stupid, or in the army are stupid, do you?
I think that there are a great number of people who join the army because they want a place to live and food, which is the system you just described, and that's pretty much independent of intelligence.
They seem to be joining the army based around patriotism, the ability to get paid, the ability to do things like that. What's that?
When were you in the army?
I was in the army for a very limited amount of time, years and years ago.
How long was that very limited amount of time, if you don't mind me asking?
It wasn't very long, about a year.
About a year. So what happened?
Well, it doesn't matter what happened.
Oh, but we're talking about service, man.
What about it?
So you want to disenfranchise people based on military service? I actually know why most people join the
What
army.
are you talking about? How would I disenfranchise them based on military service?
No,
it would be the opposite.
If you're requiring people to serve
No,
in the
it wouldn't
military.
require them to serve in the army. Literally didn't say that.
I'm sorry about
All right,
that. Yeah.
baby.
Yeah, I literally didn't say that.
Thank you for your help.
I
Ella.
disagree. But thank you.
Okay.
Readjust this.
So now we've established that people in the army can very much be stupid. So
Nobody ever disputed you can have stupid people in the army.
okay, so again, we're trying to go
My
back.
question-
We're trying to
yeah.
figure out
So
how
let's see
your
if we
system
can't.
would work
Yeah, so
in terms of
Yeah.
those who are participating in some sort of civil service.
Yeah, so you would have
are-
some type of civil service, right? Which
Okay.
a person would participate in for at least 5 years.
5 years.
Yes, unpaid.
5?
Yes, unpaid.
That's ridiculous.
Why? Do you think that the person who participated in it for 5 years unpaid would really want to be politically informed by the end of that? Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that's 5 years of not having. Like that's 5 years of like housing is paid for, food is paid
Service
for.
guarantees citizenship.
So can I ask who's paying for 5 years of millions of people participating in a civil?
Well, chances would be pretty good it wouldn't be millions, or at least not hundreds of millions of people participating in such a system.
So
It'd be
you
a
would
very
like to
low
limit the
demographic.
voting block in this country to less than? There's 430 million people in this country, and you'd like to limit it to less
330
than
million.
hundreds of millions?
It's 330 million in the United States, I think. 336 million or something.
Regardless, you would still like to limit it to, I misspoke, my bad, but you
Yeah.
would still like to limit it to less than, you would like to limit it to hundreds of thousands of people?
Yeah.
You think it's fair for hundreds of thousands of people to speak on behalf of 360 million people?
Do you think it's fair right now to have 100 senators do that?
No, but we still vote for the senators.
Yeah, I
we vote
know,
for
but
the senators,
do you
though.
really think you're getting?
They don't just walk up and say, "Hello, sir, I would
do you
like to
think
be a
you're
senator."
really
Like,
getting
it's- you're
political?
voting.
Wait, you think you're really getting political representation inside of a state like New York with 2 people?
I don't live in New York, though.
I know, but inside the state of New York, do you really think the state of New York is getting adequate political representation on Capitol Hill with 2 fucking people?
Well, that's why you have the Senate and the House, and the House. is
2
based on-
people who are your senator. You really think
Every
that
state gets 2 senators.
100 people are representing 330 million people? At the very top, it's 1 person. who's representing 330 million people's
So are you
interests.
advocating that we shouldn't have government?
No,
at all?
what I'm saying to you is that, like, it's very silly for me to look at an argument like you're making and say, oh my God, 100,000 people are going to be in charge, or 200,000 people are going to be in charge. Like, ultimately, one person's in charge.
So you're saying
ultimately one person's in charge.
But there's still checks and balances. That one person isn't a king.
There still would be checks and balances with limited voting.
Power in the guard.
There's still checks and balances with limited voting.
Yeah, but we still do not get to decide who is in our legislature. As a voting body, we do not get to decide who is in the legislature.
You would still have people from within your various communities who would be voters, and they would decide who it is that went to represent you on Capitol Hill.
That sounds very expensive and very pointless, if I'm being honest.
How is that expensive? Okay, fine.
Because you have to pay for all their housing.
Then if you want to do that, there's another way you could do this too. If you didn't want to do like the civil service way, you could do one vote per household. That would limit the voting significantly. Hang on.
Okay.
And it would be not expensive at all. But
Okay.
there's even another way that you can do it on top of that.
Alrighty.
Right? But let's just start with like one household voting.
Okay.
Same thing.
Let's do it.
You can eliminate whatever this like perceived cost is that you have. Another thing you could do is just eliminate anybody being able to vote until they reach the same age that they could become president of the United States.
Is that not 35? Mm-hmm. So you think that everyone under 35 should lose the right to vote?
Why shouldn't everyone under 35
That
be
was
able?
the most boomer shit I've ever
Why
heard
shouldn't
in my
everybody
life.
under 35 be able to be the president of the United States?
Well, because they don't have the... But they're still...
Why? Answer the question.
Because they do not yet have the experience in politics to run an entire country.
So
but just because you can't
exactly.
okay, Andrew. But just because you can't run an entire country doesn't mean that you should still not have the right to have one singular vote. It's one vote.
What are you talking about?
Yes, you can't be the president, but you are still susceptible to the laws. You can have a kid at 35. You can have a house at 35.
So,
Like,
what does that have to do with anything? But you can't be president.
below
Can't be
35,
president. Yeah.
legislatively,
Yeah.
below 35,
Yeah.
from 18 to 34, all of these people are impacted at the same level.
No, they're not all impacted at the same level. In fact, I would say...
Can they all go to jail for committing a crime?
Yeah, so I would say the
Then
opposite.
yes, they're
I would say
impacted
like
as well.
people between the ages of 18 and like 25 are mostly living at home, right? And their parents are the ones who are mostly impacted by legislation, not them. And
That
their
sounds like a
parents...
skill issue.
And their parents should actually probably have more say than them. Their parents actually have more autonomy than they do because they're dependents on them, right? Completely dependent upon them. It's like, if I look at the trends, it seems to me like if you eliminated from 18 to 25 or from 25 to 35, if the founders didn't think you should be president of the United States till you were 35, I don't think they wanted you to vote either. And you know what? That's why it was never law. Voting
Andrew,
rights are affirmed.
This is some old shit.
That's not an
dog.
argument.
This
That's
is
not an
giving-
argument.
Well, I mean, the reason why
Give me
you're
the
saying this is
argument.
because you're young, you're old. Like, you are not applicable to this law.
What did that have to do with anything?
You're trying to govern a group of people that you are not a member of.
So?
That's the issue.
So what?
Everyone should be representative government.
So how old do you think the average person who's in Congress is?
Hella old, and,
And
we
they're
hate
representing all of you. What do
that.
you
And
mean?
I hate that.
So you think that like 19-year-olds are going to be better governing than 60-year-olds?
No, but I don't think an 80-year-old would be a representative government.
Yeah,
I'm
but
glad Mitch McConnell's
80-year-olds are
stepping down.
dying
Too
in their
old.
depends. They're not governing. What do you mean?
Yes, they are.
No, they're
Sleepy
not.
Joe.
Sleepy Joe, who is in his 80s, now has cancer, and he's not president because he went off the deep end.
I know. And Trump is in his 70s, and Mitch McConnell is in his 80s.
Listen,
all of these people are hella old.
Your presidents and congressmen are running like between the late 40s to 50s to 60s. You don't really think that replacing them with 20-year-olds is a good idea, do you?
I don't think we should replace them with 20-year-olds, but
Why
I'd
not?
settle for
Why
a
not? Wait,
smooth
why
40.
not? Why not?
Well, they'd have to be elected first.
Yeah,
no?
I know, but even if they were, don't you think that would still probably not be the worst, that wouldn't be a good idea?
If they were elected through a democratic representative democracy.
Don't you think they would do a
I would
worse
not have a
job,
problem
though,
with that.
than 40, 50, 60-year-olds would?
Well, we don't know who it is. You can't just say universally, I think a 20-year-old would be worse if they are
Lord.
elected democratically.
Well, why do you think our founders thought that 35 years old was the minimum?
I think the founders thought 35 should be the minimum because you need experience in government to be the head of the government.
No
which I agree
experience in
with.
government is even required to become the president of the United States. 0.
Sure.
So why this age of 35?
Well, because you have to have lived in this country for long enough to understand it on a basic level.
Because they also thought you just didn't have the requisite experience probably in life to govern at all.
That's fair. To govern the entire country, I would say that
To govern
someone under-
anybody?
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I think so.
Well,
I
then why
mean,
can't-
why
why-
is it that they didn't let people vote? Why do you think they didn't want people to vote?
I mean, dude, they were kind of fucked up. I mean, do you really want to base all of your beliefs on the founding fathers? They owned slaves.
So?
So
The whole world owned slaves.
just because a lot of people do something doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, we were some of the first to take people out of slavery, especially the West.
Pretty sure that was England. France did it second.
The West, then? That's the West. England.
That's not America.
That's the West, which is what I said. The
But do you know
West.
difference? You said we were the first as in America.
The
no?
West is what I said.
I
The
mean, I don't
West.
think we're the same country as England. Sure, we're like
Yeah,
all
but
in
we're
the
part
same
of the
hemisphere.
West, right?
Yeah,
Like
but
England?
We are not run by the same government as England.
Yeah,
We
but
fought a whole war
we're
about
part
it.
of the West, and I said the West is the ones who.
You can't
took
take
us-
credit for something another country did, dog.
Well, first of all, many of the people who came here from England, right? The idea of the repudiation of slavery came from those very same dogmas.
What time
so,
is it, Brian?
so I don't know what you're talking
We're
about.
at 4:30.
We're at 4. Okay, dude, you've just spent the last hour trying to defend the belief that both sexes should be somehow disenfranchised from voting. This whole one per household, the one marriage system, and I think fundamentally you have not been able to create an appeal to
Why
how
are we
this
in
would
like
work
closing
practically.
statements here?
Well, because we're supposed to be debating feminism. We never even got to it.
Well, this would be a key component to this, actually. But I'm actually fine with this if you want to move it on to that. But
I
here's
mean,
the thing:
if you wanna
never
keep
made
doing
a
it, we
single
can.
argument.
The argument is that people should be legislatively represented and allowed to vote.
Yeah,
in a
that's an
representative
assertion.
Democracy.
That's just an assertion, not an argument. That's just like, I think so.
The argument is if people are impacted by the laws that
Okay.
legislators create, then they should have a say in who those legislators are.
Yeah, but
whether it's a small say,
but that's a
okay.
performative contradiction because you said that people who are affected by laws who A, don't live here, or B, are younger than a certain threshold should be
It's not a
disenfranchised.
performative contradiction. It's the point of democracy.
No, it's
is
listen.
that we should be represented by a representative
I
government.
need you to understand this logically. That you're performing a
It doesn't make
contradiction.
sense logically because it's a logical fallacy. You were arguing a logical fallacy.
No, what's the fallacy?
The fallacy is that you're trying to essentially stop stupid people from voting by
That's
making
not
sure
a
that less
fallacy.
people
That's
can
not a
vote.
logical fallacy.
Well, you didn't let me finish the sentence.
Okay.
You're trying to stop stupid people from voting by making it so that less people can vote, which is in turn taking away the power of the voter.
What's the fallacy?
Well, you're trying to empower voters by taking away voters'
Yeah, how
power.
is that a
That's
logical fallacy?
You can't empower voters by taking away their power.
How am I trying to empower voters? What are you
I thought the whole
talking
point
about?
is that you're trying to combat tribalism and that you want smart people's votes to
What
not
does that
be
have to do with
nullified by
empowering
stupid
voters?
I thought that's why you're against NGOs, lobbyists, bribes. You want to empower the people.
I don't know what you're talking.
So you just don't want the country.
I don't even
to
know
be
what you're talking
represented?
about. What I'm saying
Ooh,
to
he's
you is
getting
that if you want to
grumpy.
eliminate tribalism, you don't want to have nothing but an unlimited amount of people voting, where NGOs can mark to the stupid people and bend them to their will, and now have that entire bracket for whatever it is their political agendas are.
So again, why not just get rid of NGOs? Why is oh my God, NGOs are a problem?
Would you
Let's
like
make
to-
sure less people can vote.
Gee, I never thought of that. Why don't we get rid of NGOs, the people who are utilizing tribalism so that they exist? Boy, I wish I had thought of that.
You're utilizing tribalism?
No, they're utilizing tribalism so they exist.
Okay, but you're a political pundit. You have the power to help people. Why not promote a stance that is actually useful to them instead of trying to take away their vote?
Great. A stance that would be actually useful to them would be having their well-informed votes not nullified by non-well-informed voters of what you believe and I believe are more than the well-informed voters. That's exactly something I can do to help everybody.